At last, and thank God some might say, the travel rules are finally dramatically simplified, at least if you're double jabbed.
The purpose is to make it easier for people to travel without the bureaucracy, without so many tests, and with a greater level of certainty.
Well, not before time, the industry says, as many of them have been boiling with frustration. So will it be in time to stave off mass job losses when furlough comes to an end? Also on News at 10. It is an unprecedented move tonight. The French withdraw diplomats from America and Australia over the Security Pact. The new COVID drug that helped Trump and could now save lives here in the UK. Rape and sexual assault should be treated on a par with terrorism, a new report from the police watchdog after Sarah Everard's murder. Back in Bromley, but now Britain's new sporting superstar is facing a whole new challenge.
I can't get a tennis court either. I still can't get a court.
And London Fashion Week as you have never seen it before.
I want people to see Heidi and not just Heidi in a wheelchair. It's so important.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Few sagas have been as varied and at times, frankly, incomprehensible as the government's regulations on international travel. Glossing politely over the many bizarre twists, including the infamous you can but you shouldn't period, they have at least finally simplified them in time for the summer holiday season. Oh wait. Not quite, but still better late than never, the travel industry would perhaps argue. So from October the 4th, out goes the current traffic light system governing whether people need to quarantine when they return. In comes a single, slimmed-down red list of countries, with Turkey, Pakistan and the Maldives to be removed from that lineup. You'll only need to do a single lateral flow test after you come back, provided you are double vaccinated.
It's been far from normal for the last 18 months or so, and the thought of a trip abroad to somewhere like here in Turkey has felt almost unimaginable for many. The government says it's now time for that to change, and today they set out new measures to make international travel easier.
We're announcing a new, simpler, easier system which will decrease the burden on people travelling and stay in place at least till the new year. It means you won't have to take a pre-departure test. The day 2 PCR test will be scrapped in favour of a lateral flow. And all of this is only available because so many people have been vaccinated.
So what's changing? Well, the 3 travel lists, red, amber and green, will be slimmed down to just 2. A red list of 54 countries where travellers will need to quarantine in a hotel for 10 days, and a rest of the world list. 8 countries, including Turkey, Egypt and Pakistan, will be taken off the red list and will go on to the rest of the world list. There are also major changes to testing. If you're double jabbed, the 2 tests you need to do at the moment, one before travel and one after, costing around £70, will from next month be replaced with a single lateral flow test when you get back to England, which will cost around £20 instead. Unvaccinated passengers will still have to pay for PCR tests and will have to quarantine when they return from any destination.
It's what our customers wanted to see. The stability that that will give us allows us to have confidence that we'll be able to talk to customers about the holidays that they want to be able to book. So from that perspective, the future is bright for us in the travel industry, certainly a lot brighter than it's been in the past.
The government hopes the changes will make travelling easier. Today at Stansted, most passengers felt the current system was rather complicated.
I found it quite stressful myself because I just kept doubting that I had the right tests and the right documentation.
It's quite costly to organise the PCR tests and I think it has deterred a lot of travellers.
I didn't want to get it wrong in case we got to the airport and they said, oh, sorry, you can't go because you haven't done this.
While many are welcoming the move, experts are warning that using different testing methods will make it harder to detect potential new variants which might be vaccine resistant.
So lateral flow tests would miss low levels of infection. And they also, they wouldn't provide us with the option of getting sequencing information so that we know what variants are being imported into the country, which could be particularly important if we do see the emergence of variants with vaccine-evasive properties.
That's a concern shared by the Scottish Government, who will continue using PCR tests for returning passengers. It is a difficult balance to strike between giving the travel sector the boost it needs and keeping us safe and reducing the spread of COVID. Shihab Khan, News at 10.
Well, for some people, especially families eyeing up a half-term break abroad, perhaps to make up for a summer holiday that never happened, the new rules will no doubt ease the stress of travel. But others, including some furloughed workers in the travel industry, are saying it is a case of too little, too late.
Was you on the trampoline?
I don't remember there being a trampoline.
No?
No. Me either.
Some of us are too young to remember foreign holidays. The last time the Kennard family were able to go away, 4-year-old Erin was still in nappies. Now they're booked to go back to Lanzarote at the end of October.
I'm really excited. Very, very, really excited. Because I haven't been on a plane for ages.
For her dad John, not having to do PCR tests will save a lot of stress and about £300.
When you've got multiple PCR tests to do, it just puts a lot of strain on something which is already quite difficult when you've got kids going away, you know. Yeah, I'm really excited about being able to go, and I do feel good about this time that it's going to happen.
Airlines hope the relaxation in the rules will give tourists more confidence to take off this winter. But some are critical that the changes to testing won't kick in for another month.
I think I'm somewhat disappointed there was a delay in the PCR being completely removed, being replaced by antigen, simply because the rest of Europe has travelled freely all summer for double jabbers with absolutely no restriction.
Change can't come soon enough for the travel industry, which says it's lost 95,000 jobs during the pandemic. Another 226,000 are thought to have gone in its supply chains. And more redundancies are expected as around half of travel industry employees remain furloughed, and the scheme finishes at the end of this month. Martins Malomo is an aircraft dispatcher who spent 16 months on furlough. At last, he's been given some hope.
In an ideal world, it would have been better for this announcement to have come earlier. Perhaps, you know, it could have saved a lot of jobs as well. But then, here we are now today with this announcement, which I would say is a very welcoming announcement.
The question now is whether enough people, like the Kennards, will be convinced that foreign travel can be as carefree as it once was. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Bristol.
And Anushka is here to make sense of this. Good luck. I guess one question people are going to have is, why on earth didn't they do this at the start of the summer?
Well, I think in part it's the way that this decision has been made, which is by committee. In this case, a committee of cabinet ministers called COVID-O, and they didn't all agree. From what I understand, no one around that table was really gung-ho about this because they're all worried about having another Delta-like variant. But that said, you know, they did all fight their corner. So, for example, the key characters here, Grant Shapps in Transport, was worrying about the travel industry. The Culture Secretary, who was until this week Oliver Dowden, was worrying about the creative industries and artists going abroad, both arguing for more of a loosening. Now, you might think from the rhetoric from Sajid Javid when he became Health Secretary that he'd be in their gang. But as I understand it, maybe because of the NHS stats and the warnings of public health experts, he became more cautious. The thing that has now changed is that the modelling has changed and things like positivity rates for vaccinated travellers have really fallen, and that is what has persuaded them to go ahead with it now.
Again, there's a big sting in this, which is if you haven't been vaccinated and you, for whatever reason, don't want to get vaccinated, the burdens are going to be very serious. Is there likely to be a political row about that, do you think?
I mean, it's really harsh on unvaccinated people, but ministers are totally unapologetic about it. They think that there's enough of a difference between the spread if you're vaccinated or if you're not. They think this might nudge more people into getting vaccinated. But also on the politics that you mention, they say to me, it's true that vaccine passports at home cause a huge row, but they think people are more understanding when it comes to foreign travel.
OK. Fascinating story for tonight. Thank you very much indeed. And for the full list of which countries are and indeed are not on the New Look Red List, you can visit our dedicated site at itv.com/holidaynews. Now, the simmering diplomatic row that greeted Australia's decision to buy American nuclear-powered submarines instead of French conventional ones boiled over tonight in a really unprecedented move. The French, close allies after all, withdrew diplomats from both America and Australia over the recent security pact. France said the new three-way defence alliance, which includes the UK, represented, and I quote, unacceptable behaviour between allies. Well, let's go and talk to Emma in Washington about this. It's really, I mean, you think France, you know, with America, fellow NATO member, it's hard to think of anything one can really recall. What's your take on it?
Well, when President Biden announced this deal on Wednesday night, he said it was a historic pact. He hailed it as a way for the West to try and tackle China when it came to the Indo-Pacific. And he said this was a really very significant big moment. But actually what it's done is created a rather historic situation for the French, who have now recalled their ambassadors. This is a very significant moment, and I don't think it can be underestimated how angry the French are about this. We got the first inkling of their fury after their initial statements last night, when there was this gala to be held here in DC to celebrate Washington-French relationships, and then that was cancelled. The foreign minister said this was a terrible act of backstabbing, and actually levelled the most dreadful accusation you could level at a Democrat, saying it was the kind of behaviour he would have expected from Donald Trump. And then tonight, the White House blindsided themselves by the fact that these ambassadors have been recalled. What's interesting is that the ambassador to the UK hasn't been called back yet. Potentially an attempt by the French to try and make the UK feel like a rather bit part in this alliance.
OK, Emma, thank you very much indeed. And Joe Biden is also facing some very serious problems on another front tonight. Earlier this evening, the United States admitted that a military drone strike in Kabul at the end of last month killed civilians only and not an Islamic State extremist, reversing its original claim. The Pentagon called the strike, in which 7 children were reported to be among the dead, a tragic mistake. Now, there's been a lot of debate about the Trump legacy, and not all of it has been hugely positive. But the former president does tonight turn out to have been a successful and effective guinea pig for a new coronavirus treatment. A drug called Ronapreve, given to Mr. Trump when he had COVID last year, is to be rolled out to vulnerable patients across the NHS. The Department of Health said thousands of people who lack antibodies against COVID could benefit.
It was good enough for the President of the United States back then, and it is good enough for NHS patients now. Donald Trump called it a blessing.
It was like unbelievable. I felt good immediately.
It's not a miracle cure, but it does give real hope to thousands of the most vulnerable COVID patients who have failed to respond to existing treatments, unable to produce their own antibodies. And reassurance to Charlie Harper, who has a condition that suppresses his immune system.
I know many that have been hospitalised due to COVID, and without the treatments that have been authorised today, many would go in without any real plan from the doctors. The difference in terms of what's been shown today is really life-saving for so many people, and I think so many families will be grateful for this news.
The drug is costly, and its use will be prioritised to treat patients without antibodies who are over 50 and younger patients who are immunocompromised. It's been shown to reduce hospital stays by 4 days and to cut the risk of death by 20%. Researchers have developed a cocktail of man-made proteins to act like natural human antibodies, binding tightly to the virus and so blocking its path into the body's cells.
Well, this will save lives. There are some people whose immune systems cannot make the antibodies or make them in sufficient quantities. For example, people with certain cancers. And it will be a viable treatment in order to keep them alive and stop those people from dying.
The treatment will be rolled out next week as science closes in on a disease that was new to the planet less than 2 years ago. John Ray, News at 10.
The Welsh Government today decided it would follow the Scottish example and bring in vaccine passes for many venues and events. The measure, which will come into force from October the 11th, applies to anyone entering a nightclub. NHS COVID passes will also have to be shown in order to attend indoor, non-seated events for more than 500 people and many large outdoor events. Wales's First Minister, Mark Drakeford, said the move was to help people stay safe.
We want to do everything we can now to keep Wales open and to keep Wales safe. These are examples of the measures that SAGE calls low-cost interventions. Interventions that, if we take them now, we hope will be enough to prevent the need for tougher restrictions later on.
Millions of people shared in the outrage caused by the rape and murder of Sarah Everard and the immediate and insistent demands that something be done. Well, today, the first major response was seen to the unpalatable truth that emerged with shocking clarity from her death, that the threat of violence, both on the streets and at home, is a daily reality for many women. A root and branch report by the police watchdog is calling for complete change in the handling of violence against women, which it says should be treated on a par with terrorism.
Jam Mustafa's body was discovered in the most horrific circumstances, crammed into a chest freezer alongside another victim. Her family claim they alerted the police to the violent past of the man who lived at this property.
Raping, abusing, you name it, he's done it, and the police, it's on their file. So as soon as his name was flagged up, what did they do? Nothing. They just left it and left him get on with it. While the police were knocking at the door, Jan was in the property and she could have been alive, but we're never going to know.
The statistics are stark. One woman is killed by a man every 3 days in the UK. And in the year to March 2020, there were 1.6 million female victims of domestic abuse. But over the same period, there were just 61,000 prosecutions for domestic abuse against men and women. The murder of Sarah Everard provoked protests and outrage, resulting in today's review, which is calling for these offences to be treated in the same way as terrorism.
There's a much clearer focus when we talk about tackling counter-terrorism. There's an understanding what's going to be done at national, regional and local level. There's better funding. There's a relentless pursuit of perpetrators. And all of those features we think should be brought into play in terms of tackling violence against women and girls.
This 25-year-old is a trainee barrister who was raped during an abusive relationship. We've concealed her identity. Despite going to the police, she's still waiting for charges to be brought 2 years later.
How do these constant delays make you feel?
I feel really upset that they've done this, and it's for other women as well. It's not just me. It's sad that this is the norm and not the exception. That it's just hurtful to know that they really don't care, because you wouldn't see those statistics in any other crime, ever. So it's hard not to say it's about women and girls.
Although the police accept there are inconsistencies across forces, they say they cannot tackle this epidemic alone.
So I think this is a societal problem, and it's not something that we can police our way out of. It's inextricably linked with people's perceptions of the status of women, with misogyny, with sexism, and we have to do more. Everybody needs to stand up and challenge. That is not acceptable.
The UK's first domestic abuse commissioner has written to the government, urging them to strengthen legislation currently going through Parliament, both to reflect the increased levels of violence against women and the public backlash. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
2 men appeared in court in Northern Ireland today, charged with the murder of the journalist Lira Mckee. Miss Mckee was shot dead in the Cregan area of Londonderry in April 2019 while she was observing a riot. An extremist Republican group calling itself the New IRA has previously claimed it carried out the killing.
Almost 18 months after Lira Mckee was shot dead, we may be getting closer to finding out who was responsible. 2 men, 21-year-old Jordan Devine and 33-year-old Peter Kavanagh, were arrested earlier this week. Now charged with her murder, today they faced their first court hearing. The defendants appeared on a video link with Londonderry Magistrates Court as details of their alleged crimes were read out. They're also accused of possession of a firearm and ammunition with intent to endanger life and along with a 20-year-old Joe Campbell, they're all charged with possession of and throwing petrol bombs and rioting. In April 2019, Lira Mckee was on the Creggan estate in Derry. It was a violent place that night, with petrol bombs flying through the air and gunshots aimed towards police. Lira Mckee was struck in the head. She'd been near a police Land Rover. When a volley of gunshots rang out, she was hit.
Lira had been visiting friends here on the Creggan estate that night. As a journalist, she was drawn towards the disturbances which had been sparked by police raids on dissident Republican addresses. She was observing the developing riot when she was fatally wounded.
In a statement, Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis said, "This was an utterly senseless and shocking crime, and I applaud the continued work of the police to bring those responsible to justice. The tragic murder," he said, "was a reminder that a small minority of individuals continue to seek to cause harm to communities." The court heard from a lawyer who suggested there was zero sustainable evidence against Jordan Devine and that it was beyond belief that Peter Kavanagh was identified with the case. The judge granted all three bail, but they will remain in custody pending an appeal of that decision next week. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Derry.
The Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics were generally perceived as major achievements for the host nation, but more and more people in Japan are now asking what price success. Despite the delay of a year with no crowds and with the voices of opponents marginalised, organisers still delivered the sporting spectacle the world wanted. Now, though, allegations are emerging about the darker side of what it took to make that happen. Dying COVID patients who couldn't get a hospital bed, games workers telling us how unsafe they felt, and a big spike in infections.
They demanded it was cancelled. They fought to have it stopped. Japan was in a state of emergency, so the Olympic and Paralympic Games were not welcomed, but feared. They went ahead anyway.
The whole "we are taking measurements to keep everybody safe" was just a joke.
This man agreed to talk to ITV News anonymously. He worked at the Olympic Park and didn't feel protected.
They didn't have any vaccines for us. We were not PCR tested. Only certain people were actually getting these. There was so much wrong in there, right? But if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be able to make rent, food.
Yet the spectacle and the smiles went on. The government and organisers assured people that safety was paramount. So they came out to enjoy it, and COVID cases increased. A month before the Olympics started, 619 positive COVID cases were recorded in Tokyo. By the time the opening ceremony came around, that number had more than doubled, and it continued to rise. 3 weeks after events began, it peaked at 5,773 cases.
She did it in the 400.
Inside the arenas, Japan's athletes bathed in gold medal glory. While outside, others suffered. Yuko Nishizato's father caught COVID in August.
It is difficult to even look at these photographs.
He died after being turned away from hospital. There weren't enough beds and resources were stretched.
I can't help but think that if the money had been spent elsewhere and doctors had been where they were supposed to be, there wouldn't have been a shortage of beds. So many people wouldn't have died.
10,000 medical staff were needed for the Games alone. The country's vaccine rollout was slow, so resistance to the virus was poor.
It would have been better to postpone at least the Olympic, probably for a couple of months, until the vaccination really kicked in. In that way, perhaps we could have probably saved more people's lives.
But the International Olympic Committee told us that 40,000 vaccine doses were provided to Games participants from Japan. The workforce, depending on their role, was also covered by the vaccination programme. By following basic public health measures and delivering a strong testing programme, it was shown that it is possible to keep the pandemic at bay. The authorities deemed the Games a success, a great show.
There it is, can you believe it?
But they are conclusions many would contest. Lucy Watson, News at 10.
So far, Emma Radekanu has managed to treat becoming Britain's newest sporting superstar with the same cheerful composure she showed whilst actually winning the US Open last week. She does appear to have hit one little snag. However, there has, of course, been a surge of interest in people taking up tennis after her amazing victory. So much so, as she told ITV, she's finding it hard to book a court herself.
Morning, Emma.
Morning, Emma. You all right? Well
Congratulations.
Done. For the teenage tennis star who's pulled off one of the greatest sporting feats, coming home was about keeping her own feet on the ground. From hugs with dad to mum's homemade dumplings for dinner. And a first chance to watch her historic win in the US Open.
Yeah, I think 100% it's more stressful watching. I think that when you're playing, you feel like you have more control, and in the moment and in this situation, you can make the decisions.
After storming to that victory, she joined her fans singing the soundtrack to a great British sporting summer. An anthem, she said, that rang out on her own team bus afterwards too.
We had a bit of a karaoke bus going where we replayed Sweet Caroline and also Mr. Brightside, and we're having a good sing-along.
And what of the £1.8 million prize money? Emma revealed she hasn't yet checked her bank balance since winning it.
No, I haven't logged on. I haven't done anything. I've just been at home or been in the moment. I haven't even thought about that, to be honest.
She has been enjoying her global superstar status while effecting a tennis boom in Britain, ironically leaving her struggling to book a court at her local club.
Can I say I can't get a tennis court either? I still can't get a court at my local club.
The world, though, is at her feet. Bring on Wimbledon 2022. Sejal Karia, News at 10.
What a star, but in less good sporting news, Derby County are tonight set to call in the administrators as the championship side's financial woes continue. Its directors said they had no choice but to make the tough decision, which will almost certainly trigger a deduction of 12 points. Finally, the exotic caravan that is the globe-trotting world of high fashion arrives in London this weekend. London Fashion Week will be the usual gathering of supermodels, elite designers and top fashion editors. There's a difference this year, though. One of the headline shows is a collection of fashions designed for wheelchair users.
It's when the lens of the world's creative elite focuses on London. Fashion Week. But backstage, one woman is doing something entirely new.
I had a lot of problems in finding something that would make me look fabulous, something I would rock it and say, oh God, I look good. So I decided to do something about it.
A collection designed specifically for wheelchair users. Unbelievably, this is the first time there's been one at London Fashion Week. Faduma was paralysed by a meningitis infection 10 years ago.
When you're told something tragic, when you're told you'll never be able to move a finger in your whole entire life, you have a choice to either make it or break it. I decided to make it, to overcome any barrier that comes on my way.
And now you're overcoming barriers in the fashion industry.
Yeah, I hope so. I want every disabled person to be able to get a shirt or a top or trousers in any shop they walk in, just like anybody else.
The trousers at the front are longer than they are at the back.
Harriet was picked to design the collection. Pockets are lower down the thigh for access. Sleeves allow arm movement for pushing wheels.
The seams there are just as flat as possible to avoid any sort of pressure points or rubbing or anything like that.
Because that could actually cause injuries.
Yeah, there's a real problem that's not being addressed at the moment by the fashion industry.
I fell down the stairs actually and I broke my neck.
Heidi is one of the models. Until now, she's had to adapt clothes herself.
How does it feel to be modelling something that's designed for you?
Fabulous, darling. Yes, I'm loving the colours and everything. You know, I want people to see Heidi and not just Heidi in the wheelchair. It's so important.
If London Fashion Week is a kind of cultural barometer, surely there's a need, a responsibility even, to showcase diversity of all kinds. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
That's it. Good night.